I found my daughter's OnlyFans account completely by accident. And when I looked at her subscriber list, there was only one name, Walter Henderson. My best friend of 30 years. My name is Calvin Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and I just discovered that my 24-year-old daughter Jasmine has been running an OnlyFans account with a single subscriber who's been paying her $5,000 a month for the past 3 years. That subscriber is Walter Henderson, a 70-year-old man I've considered my closest friend since we worked together at the steel mill in the 1990s. The man I trusted with my family, my secrets, and my daughter's well-being. The man who's been calling himself Uncle Walter to Jasmine since she was 6 years old. I discovered this nightmare on a Tuesday afternoon when I was trying to help Jasmine set up her new laptop. She'd asked me to transfer some files from her old computer, and I was going through her downloads folder when I found a folder labeled "of content." "What's of content?" I asked, clicking on the folder before Jasmine could stop me. "Dad, don't." But it was too late. The folder opened to reveal hundreds of photos and videos of my daughter in various states of undress, posed in ways that made my stomach turn and my heart break simultaneously. "Jasmine, what is this?" She started crying immediately. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain why you have pornographic photos of yourself on your computer." "They're not pornographic. They're just there for my OnlyFans account." OnlyFans. I'd heard of it but never really understood what it was. A platform where people paid to see explicit content from creators. And my daughter was one of those creators. "How long has this been going on?" 3 years, she whispered. "Since I turned 21. 3 years. For 3 years, my daughter had been selling sexual content online while I thought she was working as a freelance graphic designer. How many people are paying to see this?" Jasmine looked at the floor. "Just one. Just one." Which meant this wasn't some anonymous internet business. This was a personal arrangement with a specific person who'd been paying thousands of dollars to see my daughter naked. "Who?" "Dad, please don't make me." "Who?" "Jasmine." "Uncle Walter." The room started spinning. Walter Henderson, the man I'd known for 3 decades, the man I'd trusted with my life, had been paying my daughter for sexual content since she was 21 years old. "Uncle Walter has been paying you for this?" "He's been helping me financially," she said defensively. "He knows how expensive everything is, and he wanted to support me." Supporting her. Walter had been supporting my daughter by paying her to create pornographic content for his personal consumption. "Jasmine, do you understand what this means? Do you understand what Uncle Walter has been doing? He's been helping me. He cares about me. He's been exploiting you. He's been paying you for sexual content while pretending to be your loving uncle." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like? Explain to me how a 70-year-old man paying my daughter $5,000 a month to see her naked is anything other than exploitation." Jasmine couldn't answer that question because there was no good answer. Walter had been grooming my daughter for years, positioning himself as the caring uncle who wanted to help her financially, while secretly paying her for sexual content that fed his perverted desires. "How did this start, Jasmine? How did Uncle Walter go from being our family friend to being your OnlyFans subscriber?" "It wasn't like that. He offered to help me when I was struggling with college expenses. He said he had money sitting around and wanted to invest in my future." "And when did that investment turn into paying for pornographic content?" "It wasn't pornographic at first. It was just photos, like modeling photos. He said I was beautiful and could make money modeling if I wanted to." Modeling photos. Walter had convinced my daughter that taking photos for him was a form of modeling rather than the beginning of a sexual exploitation scheme. When did the photos become sexual? "Gradually." He said the modeling industry was competitive, and I needed to be more flexible with what I was willing to do. More flexible. Walter had gradually escalated his demands, conditioning my daughter to believe that increasingly sexual content was normal and necessary for her financial survival. And you didn't think there was anything wrong with a 70-year-old man asking you to take naked photos? He never asked for anything inappropriate. He just said I should explore all my options for making money with my looks. My daughter had been so successfully groomed that she didn't even recognize what had happened to her. Walter had convinced her that selling sexual content to him was a legitimate business arrangement rather than a form of abuse. Jasmine, Uncle Walter has been manipulating you. He's been grooming you for years to get you to do exactly what you're doing now. That's not true. Uncle Walter loves me like family. Uncle Walter loves you like a predator loves his victim. Don't say that about him. He's the only person who's ever really supported my dreams and goals. The only person who'd ever really supported her dreams and goals. Walter had positioned himself as Jasmine's primary source of emotional and financial support, creating a dependency that made her vulnerable to his exploitation. What dreams and goals, Jasmine? What dreams require you to sell naked photos to a 70-year-old man? I want to be a model and an influencer. Uncle Walter said this was good practice for building a following and learning how to market myself. Building a following. Walter had convinced my daughter that having one perverted old man as her only subscriber was preparation for a legitimate modeling career. Jasmine, real models don't start their careers by selling sexual content to old men who've known them since childhood. You don't understand the industry, Dad. Things are different now. Things were different now. Walter had convinced my daughter that exploitative relationships were normal in the modern world, that selling herself to him was just smart business. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, intelligent, talented daughter who'd been my pride and joy for 24 years, and realized that Walter Henderson had stolen her innocence, her self-respect, and her future while I'd been completely oblivious to what was happening. Jasmine, we need to talk about this more. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. What? Has Uncle Walter ever asked you to meet him in person for content creation? The look of guilt that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know. Sometimes, she whispered. Sometimes. My daughter had been meeting Walter in person to create sexual content for him. The man I'd trusted with my family had been having sexual encounters with my daughter while maintaining his facade as the caring family friend. How often? Maybe once a month. He has a studio apartment that he uses for his photography hobby. His photography hobby. Walter had told my daughter that their sexual encounters were related to his interest in photography rather than his desire to exploit a young woman he'd been grooming for years. And what happens during these photography sessions? Dad, I don't want to talk about this. We have to talk about this, Jasmine. What has Uncle Walter been doing to you? Nothing bad. He's always been respectful and professional. Professional. Walter had convinced my daughter that their sexual relationship was professional rather than predatory. But I needed to know the full extent of what Walter had done to my daughter before I decided how to handle the situation. Jasmine, I want you to think very carefully about something. When did Uncle Walter first suggest that you could make money with your appearance? When I was in college. I was struggling with tuition and living expenses, and he offered to help. How old were you? 18. I was a freshman. 18. Walter had waited until my daughter was barely legal before beginning his grooming process, suggesting that he'd been planning this exploitation for years while she was still a minor. And how did he first offer to help? He said he had some extra money and wanted to invest in my education. He gave me $500 a month for expenses. $500 a month with no strings attached. Walter had started by creating financial dependency, making my daughter grateful for his help and more likely to agree to his future requests. When did he first ask you to take photos? About 6 months later. He said I was so beautiful that I should consider modeling, and he could help me build a portfolio. 6 months of financial dependency before introducing the sexual component. Walter had been patient, methodical, and calculating in his approach to grooming my daughter. And you didn't think it was strange that a 67-year-old man wanted to photograph you? He said he was learning photography as a hobby and needed models to practice with. He said it would help both of us. Help both of us. Walter had framed his exploitation as mutually beneficial, making my daughter feel like she was helping him while he was actually destroying her. Over the next hour, I learned the full scope of what Walter had done to my daughter. He'd started by offering financial help when she was 18 and struggling with college expenses. He'd gradually introduced the idea that she could make money modeling, offering to help her build a portfolio. He'd slowly escalated the sexual nature of the photos, always framing it as normal modeling practice. He'd convinced her to start an OnlyFans account, claiming it would help her build a following for her modeling career. He'd become her only subscriber, paying her $5,000 a month for increasingly explicit content. He'd arranged monthly in-person sessions at his apartment, framing them as professional photography shoots. And throughout this entire process, he'd maintained his role as the family friend, attending birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and family events while secretly exploiting my daughter. Walter Henderson had spent 6 years systematically grooming and exploiting my daughter while pretending to be our trusted family friend. But what made me sickest of all was realizing that I'd enabled his access to Jasmine by trusting him, inviting him to family events, and encouraging their relationship because I thought he was being a good uncle figure. I'd handed my daughter to her predator without even realizing it. That evening, after Jasmine had gone to her apartment, I sat in my living room trying to process what I'd learned. My best friend of 30 years had been sexually exploiting my daughter for 6 years while maintaining his facade as the caring family friend. But as I thought back over Walter's relationship with our family, I started to see signs that I'd missed, warning signals that should have alerted me to his true intentions. Let me take you back to 1994, when I first met Walter Henderson and had no idea I was beginning a friendship with a man who would eventually prey on my daughter. I was 22 years old, working at the Bethlehem Steel Plant in Sparrows Point, Maryland. Walter was 40, a supervisor with 15 years of experience who took me under his wing when I started as a new hire. "Steel work is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing," he told me on my first day. "Stick with me, and I'll make sure you learn the right way." Walter was an excellent mentor. He taught me the technical skills I needed, helped me understand the workplace politics, and protected me from the kind of hazing that new workers often faced in industrial jobs. "Calvin's got potential," he'd tell the other supervisors. "He's smart, reliable, and willing to learn. We should invest in developing him." I was grateful for Walter's guidance and protection. Having an experienced supervisor as an ally made my transition into steelwork much easier than it might have been otherwise. Walter was also a family man, married to his wife Dorothy with 2 grown children who lived in other states. He seemed like a stable, responsible person who'd built a successful career and a solid family life. "Family is everything," he'd say whenever we'd talk about our personal lives. "Without family, all the money and success in the world doesn't mean anything." I respected Walter's values and his commitment to family relationships. When I got married to Denise in 1997, Walter was one of the first people I told about the engagement. "That's wonderful news," he said. "Denise seems like a good woman. You're lucky to have found someone who shares your values." Walter and Dorothy came to our wedding, and Walter gave a toast about the importance of building a life based on love, trust, and mutual respect. "Calvin and Denise have something special," he said to the wedding guests. "They're building the kind of relationship that lasts a lifetime." I was touched by Walter's support and friendship. Having him at our wedding felt like a validation that Denise and I were making good choices about our life together. When Jasmine was born in 1999, Walter was one of the first people to visit her in the hospital. "She's beautiful," he said, holding my newborn daughter with the kind of gentle care that suggested he was comfortable around babies. "You're going to be a great father, Calvin." Walter seemed genuinely happy about Jasmine's birth, and he was incredibly generous with gifts and support during her early years. He'd bring toys, clothes, and books whenever he visited. He'd offer to babysit when Denise and I needed time alone. He'd help with household projects and repairs that I couldn't handle on my own. "Let me help you with that," he'd say whenever he'd see me struggling with home improvement projects. "I've got the tools and the experience." Walter became an integral part of our family life. Not just my friend, but someone who cared about all of us and wanted to contribute to our well-being. When Jasmine was 6 years old, she started calling Walter Uncle Walter, because he was around so much and was so involved in her life. "Uncle Walter's here," she'd shout whenever his car pulled into our driveway. Walter seemed to love being called Uncle Walter. He'd light up whenever Jasmine would run to greet him, and he'd spend hours playing games with her, reading stories, and teaching her about different subjects. "She's so smart," he'd tell me while watching Jasmine work on puzzles or art projects. "You can see the intelligence in her eyes." I was proud that my friend recognized and appreciated Jasmine's intelligence. Walter's attention and encouragement seemed to boost her confidence and motivation to learn. But looking back now, I can see that Walter was paying an unusual amount of attention to Jasmine's development, her appearance, and her personality traits. "She's going to be beautiful when she grows up," he'd say when Jasmine was still in elementary school. "With those eyes and that smile, she's going to break hearts someday." At the time, I interpreted Walter's comments as the kind of thing people say about children, observations about their potential and their promising futures. Now I understand that Walter was already evaluating my daughter as a future target for his exploitation. When Jasmine was 8, Walter started bringing her more expensive gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, electronic devices that were far beyond what a normal family friend would give to a child. "You don't need to spend so much money on her," I'd tell him whenever he'd arrive with elaborate presents. "I enjoy spoiling her," he'd reply. "I never had a daughter, and Jasmine fills that gap for me." Walter was positioning himself as a father figure to Jasmine, someone whose generosity and attention were expressions of paternal love rather than grooming behavior. He also started taking Jasmine on special outings, trips to museums, amusement parks, shopping centers, and restaurants. Always with Denise's and my permission, always with detailed explanations of where they were going and when they'd be back. "I want to expose her to cultural experiences," he'd explain when asking to take Jasmine to art museums or theater performances. "She's at an age where she can appreciate these things." Walter's outings with Jasmine seemed educational and enriching. I was grateful that he was willing to invest time and money in expanding her horizons. What I didn't understand was that Walter was creating a special relationship with Jasmine, making her feel chosen and valued in ways that would make her more receptive to his future manipulation. When Jasmine entered middle school, Walter's involvement in her life became even more intensive. He'd help with homework, attend school events, and provide emotional support during the difficult social dynamics of adolescence. "School can be tough at this age," he'd tell me when Jasmine was struggling with friendship issues or academic pressure. "She needs adults who believe in her and encourage her to persevere." Walter was always available when Jasmine needed help or guidance. He'd spend hours listening to her problems, offering advice, and providing the kind of patient, individualized attention that busy parents don't always have time to give. "Uncle Walter really understands me," Jasmine would say when she was having conflicts with Denise or me. "He listens without judging." I was glad that Jasmine had another trusted adult in her life, someone who could provide perspective and support when family relationships were strained. But Walter was actually positioning himself as the adult who understood Jasmine better than her own parents, creating an emotional dependency that would make her more likely to trust his guidance even when it led her into dangerous territory. When Jasmine was 14, Walter started commenting more frequently on her appearance and her developing maturity. "She's becoming such a young lady," he'd say when Jasmine would dress up for school dances or special events. "She carries herself with real grace and confidence." Walter's comments about Jasmine's appearance seemed like the kind of observations that caring adults make about children they've watched grow up. But he was actually grooming both Jasmine and our family to accept his inappropriate interest in her physical development. He also started giving Jasmine advice about boys, dating, and relationships, advice that seemed wise and protective at the time. "Don't let boys pressure you into anything you're not ready for," he'd tell her. "You're too special to settle for someone who doesn't treat you with complete respect." Walter was teaching Jasmine to have high standards for how men should treat her, while simultaneously preparing to violate those standards himself when she became legally vulnerable. During Jasmine's high school years, Walter became even more involved in her life and her future planning. He'd help with college applications, scholarship searches, and career exploration. Jasmine has unlimited potential, he'd tell me while reviewing her college options. She could do anything she sets her mind to. Walter seemed genuinely invested in Jasmine's success and future happiness. His guidance and support were invaluable during the stressful process of preparing for college. But he was also gathering information about Jasmine's financial pressures, her insecurities about her future, and her fears about being able to afford the education she wanted. All information that he would later use to manipulate her into accepting his financial help and the sexual exploitation that came with it. When Jasmine graduated from high school in 2017, Walter gave a speech at her graduation party about how proud he was of her accomplishments and how excited he was about her future. "I've watched this young woman grow from a curious little girl into an intelligent, capable adult," he told our friends and family. "She's going to do great things with her life." Walter's speech was touching and appropriate. Everyone could see how much he cared about Jasmine and how invested he was in her success. What no one could see was that Walter was already planning to exploit the financial vulnerabilities that come with college expenses, to position himself as Jasmine's savior when she struggled with tuition and living costs. A year later, when Jasmine was struggling financially during her freshman year of college, Walter offered to help. "I hate to see her stressed about money when she should be focusing on her education," he told me when he proposed giving Jasmine monthly financial support. "Walter, that's incredibly generous, but we can't accept that kind of help." "You're not accepting it. I'm offering it directly to Jasmine. She's like a daughter to me, and I want to invest in her future." Walter insisted that his financial help was an investment in Jasmine's education rather than a gift or loan. He wanted to help her succeed without creating a burden for our family. "This is what people with resources should do," he said. "Help young people who have potential but lack opportunity." I was moved by Walter's generosity and his commitment to Jasmine's success. Having financial support would relieve enormous pressure on both Jasmine and our family. What I didn't realize was that Walter was beginning the grooming process that would culminate in 6 years of sexual exploitation disguised as career guidance and financial support. The $500 a month that Walter gave Jasmine for college expenses seemed like pure generosity from a family friend who cared about her education and her future. It was actually the first step in creating the financial dependency that would make Jasmine vulnerable to his manipulation and exploitation. Over the next few months, Walter's financial support for Jasmine increased, and his involvement in her daily life became more intensive. He'd call her regularly to check on her progress in school and offer advice about her classes, her social life, and her future plans. "Uncle Walter cares so much about how I'm doing," Jasmine would tell us during phone calls home. "He always has time to listen and give me good advice." Walter was creating an emotional intimacy with Jasmine that went beyond what was appropriate for a family friend, but it seemed like the natural extension of the caring relationship they'd had throughout her childhood. What we didn't know was that Walter was gradually positioning himself as the most important adult in Jasmine's life, the person she trusted most and depended on most heavily. When Jasmine mentioned that she was interested in modeling and photography, Walter immediately offered to help her explore those interests. "I've been getting into photography as a hobby," he told her. "Maybe I could help you build a portfolio." Photography as a hobby. Walter had found the perfect cover story for introducing sexual content into his relationship with Jasmine. He convinced her that taking photos together would help both of them. She'd get portfolio photos for her modeling aspirations, and he'd get practice with his new hobby. "It's a win-win situation," he explained to me when Jasmine mentioned their photography sessions. "She gets professional quality photos, and I get to work with a real model." I was supportive of Walter helping Jasmine with her modeling interests. He had the resources to hire professional photographers and the connections to help her understand the industry. What I didn't understand was that Walter was creating opportunities to photograph Jasmine in increasingly intimate settings, gradually normalizing sexual content while framing it as legitimate modeling work. The progression from family friend to financial supporter to photography mentor to sexual exploiter was so gradual and seemingly innocent that neither Jasmine nor I recognized what was happening until it was too late. Walter had spent 20 years building trust with our family, establishing himself as someone who genuinely cared about Jasmine's well-being and success. By the time he began sexually exploiting her, Jasmine trusted him completely and was financially dependent on his support. She couldn't recognize the exploitation because Walter had convinced her that everything they were doing was normal, professional, and beneficial to her future. And I couldn't recognize the exploitation because Walter had maintained his facade as the caring family friend who wanted nothing more than to help Jasmine succeed. But now, sitting in my living room with the knowledge of what Walter had done to my daughter, I could see the entire 24-year trajectory of grooming, manipulation, and exploitation that had culminated in a 70-year-old man paying my daughter for sexual content while maintaining his role as our trusted family friend. Walter Henderson had been playing a long game, positioning himself for decades to exploit my daughter when she became vulnerable. And I had been his unwitting accomplice, facilitating his access to Jasmine and encouraging their relationship because I thought he was being a good uncle figure. The next morning, I called my brother Marcus and asked him to meet me for lunch. I needed someone I could trust to help me figure out how to handle what I'd discovered about Walter and Jasmine. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need your advice about what to do. What's wrong? You look terrible. I told Marcus everything: the OnlyFans account, Walter's exploitation, the 6 years of sexual manipulation disguised as career guidance and financial support. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail I revealed. Calvin, you know what this is, right? This isn't just an inappropriate relationship. This is criminal sexual exploitation of a young woman by someone in a position of trust and authority. I know. But Jasmine doesn't see it that way. She thinks Walter has been helping her. That's because she's been groomed for 20 years to trust him and depend on him. Of course, she can't see the exploitation clearly. So what do I do? If I go to the police, Jasmine will hate me for destroying her relationship with the man she sees as her benefactor. If you don't go to the police, Walter will continue exploiting her and probably escalate his demands over time. Marcus was right. Walter's exploitation of Jasmine had been gradual and escalating. There was no reason to think he would stop or reduce his demands without intervention. There's something else, Marcus continued. If Walter has been doing this to Jasmine, he's probably done it to other young women over the years. Men like this don't usually limit themselves to one victim. Other young women. I hadn't considered that Walter might have a pattern of grooming and exploiting young women, that Jasmine might not be his first or only victim. You think there are others? I think Walter is 70 years old and has been cultivating relationships with young women for decades. Jasmine might be the most recent, but she's probably not the only one. That afternoon, Marcus and I met with a detective who specialized in sexual exploitation cases. Detective Sarah Williams listened to our account of Walter's relationship with Jasmine and asked detailed questions about the timeline, the financial arrangements, and the sexual content. What you're describing fits the pattern of long-term grooming and sexual exploitation, she told us. The fact that he's been cultivating this relationship since your daughter was a child makes it particularly serious. Is what he's done illegal? Absolutely. He's engaged in sexual exploitation of a young woman through financial coercion and manipulation. The fact that he's known her since childhood and positioned himself as a family friend makes it worse. What would happen if we pressed charges? We'd need your daughter's cooperation to build a case. But based on what you've told me, we'd be looking at charges related to sexual exploitation, coercion, and possibly human trafficking. Human trafficking. I hadn't thought of Walter's exploitation in those terms, but Detective Williams was right. He'd been using financial coercion to force my daughter into sexual servitude. The challenge, Detective Williams continued, is that your daughter may not recognize what's happened to her as criminal. Victims of long-term grooming often see their exploiters as benefactors rather than predators. So how do we proceed? First, we gather evidence of the financial transactions and the sexual content. Then we approach your daughter with support rather than accusations, helping her understand that she's been victimized rather than helped. And if she refuses to cooperate, Then we investigate Walter for other potential victims and build a case that doesn't rely entirely on your daughter's testimony. Detective Williams gave us specific instructions for gathering evidence and documenting Walter's exploitation. She also recommended that we consult with a therapist who specialized in helping victims of sexual exploitation understand what had happened to them. Your daughter is going to need professional help to process this situation, she explained. She's been conditioned for years to see her exploiter as someone who cares about her. Breaking that psychological bond requires specialized intervention. That evening, I sat down with Jasmine again to discuss her relationship with Walter, but this time I approached the conversation with better understanding of the dynamics involved. Jasmine, I want you to help me understand something about your relationship with Uncle Walter. What do you want to understand? I want to understand how a man who's known you since you were 6 years old ended up paying you for sexual content when you became an adult. Dad, it's not sexual content. It's modeling photos. Jasmine, I've seen the photos. They're sexual content, and you know it. Okay, some of them are more artistic than traditional modeling photos. But Uncle Walter explained that the modeling industry requires flexibility and willingness to do different types of shoots. The modeling industry doesn't require young women to create sexual content for 70-year-old men who've known them since childhood. You don't understand how things work now, Dad. Social media and online platforms have changed everything about modeling and marketing. Walter had convinced Jasmine that his exploitation was actually preparation for a legitimate modeling career, that selling sexual content to him was smart business practice. Jasmine, can you help me understand the business arrangement you have with Uncle Walter? What do you mean? I mean, how does paying you $5,000 a month for photos help your modeling career? Who else is seeing these photos? What modeling opportunities have resulted from your work with Uncle Walter? Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Well, Uncle Walter says I'm building my brand and learning how to market myself. To who? If he's your only subscriber, who else is seeing your marketing efforts? He says I'm gaining experience that will help me when I'm ready to expand to a larger audience. And when will you be ready to expand to a larger audience? When Uncle Walter thinks I'm ready. When Uncle Walter thinks she's ready. Jasmine's entire career plan was dependent on the approval of the man who was exploiting her, which meant she'd never be ready, as long as Walter wanted to maintain exclusive access. Jasmine, what do you think would happen if you told Uncle Walter you wanted to stop doing photos and focus on other types of modeling? Why would I want to do that? He's been so supportive of my goals. But what if you did? What if you decided you wanted to pursue traditional modeling without the photo sessions? I don't know. He might stop supporting me financially. And there it was. Jasmine understood that her financial security was dependent on continuing to provide sexual content to Walter. She'd been conditioned to see this dependency as support rather than coercion. Jasmine, do you realize that what you just described is sexual exploitation? You're providing sexual content because you're afraid of losing financial support. That's coercion, not career development. That's not true. Uncle Walter cares about me. Uncle Walter has been conditioning you for years to depend on him financially so that you'd be willing to provide sexual content. That's not caring, that's predatory behavior. I don't want to hear this anymore. Jasmine ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. But I could see that some part of her was beginning to question the narrative Walter had constructed about their relationship. Over the next few days, I continued gathering evidence of Walter's exploitation while trying to help Jasmine understand what had really happened to her. I found bank records showing that Walter had been transferring $5,000 per month to Jasmine's account for over 3 years, $180,000 in total payments for sexual content. I found emails between Walter and Jasmine discussing photo shoots, with Walter gradually escalating his requests and Jasmine gradually agreeing to more explicit content. I found text messages between them that revealed an inappropriate level of intimacy and emotional manipulation, with Walter positioning himself as the only person who truly understood and supported Jasmine. But the most damning evidence was Walter's own communications, where he discussed his investment in Jasmine and his expectations for returns on that investment. "You've been such a good girl for Uncle Walter," read one text message. "I'm so proud of how you've grown and developed under my guidance." Under his guidance. Walter saw Jasmine's sexual exploitation as evidence of his successful guidance rather than his criminal behavior. A week after discovering the OnlyFans account, I decided it was time to confront Walter directly. I called him and asked him to meet me at a restaurant across town, somewhere private where we could talk without interruption. "Calvin, good to see you," he said when he arrived, shaking my hand like we were still best friends. "What's this about? You sounded serious on the phone." "We need to talk about Jasmine." Walter's expression immediately became guarded. "What about Jasmine?" "I know about the OnlyFans account. I know about the $5,000 monthly payments. I know about the photography sessions at your apartment." Walter was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating his response. "Calvin, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been sexually exploiting my daughter for 3 years while pretending to be our family friend." "It's not exploitation. I've been helping Jasmine develop her career and her confidence. By paying her for sexual content. By supporting her artistic expression and helping her understand her value in the marketplace." Her value in the marketplace. Walter was describing my daughter like she was a commodity he'd been developing for his personal consumption. "Walter, you've been grooming my daughter since she was 18 years old. You've created financial dependency, gradually escalated sexual demands, and convinced her that exploitation is career development." "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did happen. Tell me how a 67-year-old man who'd known my daughter since childhood ended up paying her for sexual content." Walter looked around the restaurant, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Jasmine was struggling financially in college. I offered to help because I care about her success and happiness." "And when did helping with college expenses turn into paying for naked photos?" "It didn't turn into that. Jasmine expressed interest in modeling, and I offered to help her explore that interest." "By having her create sexual content exclusively for you?" "By helping her understand the modern modeling industry and build confidence in her abilities." The modern modeling industry. Walter was still maintaining the fiction that his exploitation was actually career guidance. "Walter, be honest with me. Have you had sex with my daughter?" "Calvin, you're asking inappropriate questions about consenting adults." Consenting adults. Walter was hiding behind the legal fiction that Jasmine was a consenting adult, ignoring the years of grooming and manipulation that had made genuine consent impossible. "Have you had sex with my daughter?" "My relationship with Jasmine is between me and her. She's 24 years old and capable of making her own decisions. She's 24 years old and has been conditioned by a 70-year-old predator to believe that sexual exploitation is career development." "I'm not a predator. I'm someone who cares about Jasmine and wants to support her goals." "By paying her for sexual content while maintaining your role as the trusted family friend?" Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that revealed exactly who he really was. "Calvin, you've always been naive about how the world works. You think everyone shares your simple values and straightforward approach to life. But the world is more complex than that." Complex. People have needs, desires, and opportunities that don't fit into neat categories. Jasmine and I have found an arrangement that benefits both of us. An arrangement that benefits both of us. Walter was describing the sexual exploitation of my daughter as a mutually beneficial business relationship. "What benefits does Jasmine get from this arrangement?" "Financial security, career guidance, emotional support, and preparation for the real world." "What benefits do you get?" Walter smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "Companionship. Appreciation. The satisfaction of helping a young woman reach her potential." Companionship. Appreciation. Walter was describing the sexual exploitation of my daughter in terms that made it sound like a romantic relationship rather than predatory abuse. Walter, you're going to stop this relationship with Jasmine immediately. I'm not going to do that. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'm going to the police with evidence of sexual exploitation, coercion, and human trafficking. Good luck with that. Jasmine is an adult who entered into this relationship voluntarily. She'll tell anyone who asks that I've been nothing but supportive and helpful. Jasmine has been groomed for 6 years to believe that your exploitation is support. That doesn't make it legal. It makes it unprovable in court. Walter was confident that Jasmine's conditioning would protect him from legal consequences, that she'd defend him rather than recognize her victimization. We'll see about that. Calvin, you're making a mistake. You're going to destroy your relationship with your daughter over something that's none of your business. It became my business when you started exploiting my daughter while pretending to be our family friend. I've been the best friend you've ever had, and I've been better to Jasmine than her own father. Better to Jasmine than her own father. Walter actually believed that sexually exploiting my daughter was superior to loving and protecting her. If you truly believe that, then you're sicker than I thought. I'm not sick. I'm realistic about human nature and practical about meeting people's needs. Meeting people's needs. Walter was describing his sexual exploitation of my daughter as a form of social service. I left that restaurant knowing that Walter had no intention of ending his exploitation of Jasmine voluntarily, and that he was confident he could manipulate her into defending him if I involved law enforcement. But I also knew that I couldn't allow the exploitation to continue, regardless of the consequences for my relationship with Jasmine. That evening, I called Detective Williams and told her about my conversation with Walter. He's not going to stop voluntarily, I told her. And he's confident that Jasmine will defend him if we press charges. That's typical for these cases. The victims often defend their exploiters because they've been conditioned to see the relationship as beneficial. So what's our next step? We build a case based on the evidence we can gather independently of your daughter's testimony, financial records, communications, documentation of the grooming process. And then we arrest Walter and hope that seeing him in custody helps your daughter understand that she's been victimized rather than helped. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Williams and her team gathered evidence of Walter's exploitation. They found financial records showing the payments to Jasmine, communications documenting the grooming process, and evidence that Walter had been engaging in similar relationships with other young women over the years. Walter Henderson has a pattern, Detective Williams told me during one of our meetings. We found evidence of at least 3 other young women he's exploited over the past 15 years. 3 other young women. Marcus had been right. Jasmine wasn't Walter's first victim, just his most recent. How did he meet them? Different ways. One was the daughter of a co-worker. One was a waitress at a restaurant he frequented. One was a student at the community college where he taught photography classes. Photography classes. Walter had been using his hobby as a way to identify and groom potential victims for years. Are they willing to testify? 2 of them are. The third is still too traumatized to participate in legal proceedings. What happened to them? Similar pattern to what happened with your daughter. Financial support, gradual escalation of sexual demands, creation of dependency, emotional manipulation. How long did the relationships last? Between 2 and 5 years each. Until the women either got older and less appealing to him, or until they found other sources of financial support and could escape the relationship. Walter had been cycling through young women for years, discarding them when they were no longer useful and replacing them with new victims. Why didn't any of them report him earlier? Same reason your daughter hasn't recognized her victimization. They were conditioned to see Walter as someone who cared about them and supported their goals. And they only understood the exploitation after the relationship ended? After they had distance and perspective, yes. It's very difficult to recognize manipulation while you're being manipulated. 3 weeks after discovering Jasmine's OnlyFans account, Walter Henderson was arrested at his home on charges of sexual exploitation, coercion, and human trafficking. The arrest made the local news, with Walter described as a 70-year-old man who had been using financial coercion to exploit young women for sexual content. When Jasmine saw the news, she called me in hysterics. "Dad, they arrested Uncle Walter. This is all your fault." "Jasmine, Uncle Walter was arrested because he's been exploiting you and other young women for years. He was helping me. He was the only person who believed in my dreams and supported my goals. He was conditioning you to depend on him so he could exploit you sexually." "That's not true. I chose to work with Uncle Walter because he offered me opportunities." "What opportunities, Jasmine? What opportunities have resulted from 3 years of creating sexual content for a 70-year-old man?" "I've learned about the modeling industry. I've built confidence. I've developed my brand." "You've been sexually exploited by a predator who convinced you that exploitation was career development." "I hate you for this. I hate you for destroying the best relationship I've ever had." The best relationship she'd ever had. Walter's grooming had been so effective that Jasmine genuinely believed that being sexually exploited was superior to being loved and protected by her family. "Jasmine, I understand that you're angry and confused. But I need you to understand that Uncle Walter is not the person you think he is. Uncle Walter is the only person who's ever really understood me. Uncle Walter has been grooming you for 6 years to make you believe exactly that." But Jasmine wasn't ready to hear the truth about Walter. She'd been too successfully conditioned to see him as her benefactor rather than her exploiter. Over the next few months, as Walter's case worked its way through the legal system, I focused on helping Jasmine understand what had really happened to her. I arranged for her to meet with Dr. Lisa Roberts, a therapist who specialized in helping victims of sexual exploitation understand their experiences. "The first thing we need to understand," Dr. Roberts explained to both of us, "is that Jasmine's feelings about Walter are real. She really does feel grateful to him, really does believe he cared about her. But those feelings are based on manipulation." "Yes, but they're still real feelings. We can't just tell Jasmine to stop feeling grateful to someone who's been central to her life for 6 years. So how do we help her understand the truth? We help her examine the pattern of their relationship, the progression from innocent help to sexual exploitation, and the ways Walter created and maintained her dependency." Dr. Roberts worked with Jasmine for several months, helping her understand the techniques Walter had used to groom and exploit her. Gradually, Jasmine began to see that Walter's help had actually been designed to create vulnerability and dependency rather than genuine support. "He always made me feel like I owed him something," she admitted during one of our family sessions. "Like I had to keep him happy because he was doing so much for me." "That's how financial coercion works," Dr. Roberts explained. "The exploiter creates a sense of obligation and debt that makes the victim feel responsible for maintaining the relationship." "But he really did help me financially. He gave you money in exchange for sexual content. That's not help, that's payment for services. But he started helping me before there was any sexual content. That's called grooming. He created financial dependency first, then gradually introduced sexual demands once you were reliant on his support." Slowly, painfully, Jasmine began to understand that her relationship with Walter had been exploitative from the beginning, that everything he'd done had been designed to position her for sexual exploitation rather than to genuinely help her succeed. "I feel so stupid," she said during one of our sessions. "How could I not see what was happening?" "You couldn't see it because Walter spent years conditioning you not to see it," I told her. "He's an expert manipulator who's been doing this to young women for decades." "But I'm supposed to be smart. I'm supposed to be able to tell when someone is lying to me." Intelligence doesn't protect you from manipulation, especially when the manipulation starts in childhood and continues for years. "How many other women has he done this to?" "At least 3 that we know about. Probably more." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. "So I wasn't special. I was just his latest victim. You were special to us, to your family. But to Walter, you were just another young woman to exploit. The realization that she hadn't been special to Walter, that she'd been just one in a series of victims, was devastating for Jasmine but also liberating. It helped her understand that Walter's attention hadn't been based on genuine appreciation of her unique qualities, but on her vulnerability as a young woman who could be manipulated and exploited. 6 months after Walter's arrest, he pled guilty to multiple charges of sexual exploitation and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing, 2 of his other victims gave impact statements describing how his exploitation had affected their lives and their ability to trust other people. Jasmine chose not to give a statement, but she did attend the hearing to see Walter sentenced. "How do you feel about the sentence?" I asked her afterward. "Relieved," she said, "and sad, and angry, all at the same time. That's normal. I keep thinking about all the time I wasted, all the opportunities one missed because I was focused on pleasing Uncle Walter instead of building a real career." You're 24 years old. You have plenty of time to build whatever career you want. But I lost 3 years of my life to his lies. You lost 3 years, but you learned something valuable about manipulation and exploitation that will protect you for the rest of your life. A year after Walter's sentencing, Jasmine had started college again, this time pursuing a degree in social work with a focus on helping victims of sexual exploitation. "I want to help other young women recognize the warning signs," she told me. "I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other people." That's a wonderful goal. I also want to understand how you missed the signs for so long. Not to blame you, but to understand how predators operate within families and communities. I missed the signs because Walter was excellent at maintaining his facade as the caring family friend. Everything he did seemed generous and appropriate. But there must have been warning signs. There were, but they were subtle. His unusual interest in your appearance and development. His eagerness to be alone with you. His creation of financial dependency. But each individual action seemed innocent. It was the pattern that was predatory, not any single action. Exactly. Walter was smart enough to never do anything that would immediately raise alarms. He built trust over decades so that his exploitation would be protected by our confidence in his character. How do we protect other families from predators like Walter? Education. Teaching people to recognize grooming behaviors and manipulation techniques. Making it clear that financial gifts and special attention from adults who aren't family members should be viewed with suspicion. And teaching young people that legitimate career opportunities don't require sexual content or secrecy. Yes. If someone is offering you opportunities that you can't discuss with your family, or that require sexual content as payment, those aren't legitimate opportunities. Jasmine's recovery from Walter's exploitation was slow and difficult, but she emerged from the experience stronger and more aware of how predators operate. She also emerged with a mission to protect other young women from the kind of manipulation and exploitation she'd experienced. 2 years after Walter's conviction, Jasmine had become an advocate for victims of sexual exploitation, speaking at conferences and workshops about the grooming process and the ways predators disguise abuse as help. "The most important thing people need to understand," she'd tell audiences, "is that predators don't look like monsters. They look like caring, generous people who want to help you succeed. They build trust over years or decades, positioning themselves as the adults who understand you better than your own family. They create financial dependency gradually, so you don't recognize that your survival has become dependent on pleasing them. And they frame exploitation as opportunity, making you feel grateful for abuse that's disguised as career development." Jasmine's advocacy work was her way of turning her victimization into something positive, of making sure that Walter's exploitation of her would ultimately result in protection for other young women. But the experience also changed our family permanently. I could never again trust my judgment about people the way I had before discovering Walter's true nature. If I could be fooled for 30 years by someone I considered my closest friend, then I could be fooled by anyone. Jasmine struggled with trust issues as well, finding it difficult to accept help or guidance from anyone without questioning their motives. I keep waiting for people to reveal their true agenda, she'd tell me. Even when someone is genuinely trying to help, I'm looking for signs that they want something from me. That's a natural response to being manipulated for so long. But it makes it hard to build relationships with people who actually do care about me. It will get easier with time, and it's better to be too cautious than too trusting. I just hate that Walter stole my ability to trust people. He didn't steal it permanently. He damaged it temporarily. Trust can be rebuilt, but it has to be rebuilt carefully. 3 years after Walter's conviction, I received a letter from him in prison. Calvin, it read, I want you to know that I never intended to hurt Jasmine or your family. I genuinely cared about her and wanted to help her succeed. I realize now that my methods were inappropriate, but my intentions were good. Even in prison, Walter was still maintaining the fiction that he'd been trying to help Jasmine rather than exploit her. I showed the letter to Dr. Roberts during one of our follow-up sessions. This is typical, she said. Sexual predators rarely acknowledge the true nature of their crimes, even after conviction. They continue to believe their own narratives about helping their victims. Should I show this to Jasmine? That's up to you and her. Some victims find it helpful to see that their exploiters haven't changed, that they're still minimizing and justifying their behavior. I decided to show Jasmine the letter, and her response was immediate and clear. He still doesn't get it, she said after reading Walter's attempt at an apology. He still thinks he was helping me instead of exploiting me. How does that make you feel? Relieved. It confirms that I made the right decision to testify against him and to cut off all contact. You had doubts about that? Sometimes I wondered if I was being too harsh, if maybe he really had been trying to help in his own misguided way. And now I know that Walter is exactly what the prosecutors said he was, a predator who's incapable of recognizing the harm he's caused. Walter's letter had the opposite effect of what he'd probably intended. Instead of generating sympathy or forgiveness, it confirmed for Jasmine that he was still the manipulative predator who had exploited her for years. 4 years after Walter's arrest, Jasmine graduated from college with a degree in social work and was accepted into a master's program focusing on trauma and exploitation recovery. I want to become the kind of therapist who could have helped me understand what was happening while it was happening, she told me at her graduation party. You want to help people recognize manipulation while they're being manipulated? I want to help families understand grooming behaviors and predatory patterns. If someone had taught you what to look for, you might have recognized Walter's behavior earlier. And if someone had taught you about financial coercion and sexual exploitation, you might have recognized what was happening to you. Exactly. Education is the best protection against predators. Jasmine's career goal was to become an expert in predatory behavior and exploitation recognition, to help other families avoid the experience we'd gone through. But she also wanted to understand the broader social factors that allow predators to operate successfully within communities and families. How do men like Walter get away with exploitation for decades? She asked during one of our conversations. They're good at hiding their true nature. They maintain facades of respectability and caring that make it difficult for people to believe they're capable of abuse. But there must be more to it than that. There is. Society trains young women to be polite, grateful, and accommodating to older men who offer help. It trains families to trust people who present themselves as generous and caring. So predators exploit social norms about respect, gratitude, and trust. Yes. They use our values against us, making it seem ungrateful or suspicious to question the motives of someone who's offering help. How do we change that? We teach people that it's okay to question motives, okay to be suspicious of unusual generosity, okay to set boundaries even with people who claim to care about us. And we teach young people that legitimate opportunities don't require secrecy, sexual content, or isolation from family support. 5 years after discovering Jasmine's OnlyFans account, our family had rebuilt our relationships and our understanding of trust, but we were forever changed by the experience of Walter's betrayal. I learned that even people you've known for decades can be hiding predatory intentions, that generosity and care can be weapons used by manipulative people, and that protecting your family requires constant vigilance rather than simple trust. Jasmine learned that exploitation can be disguised as opportunity, that predators are skilled at making their victims feel special and grateful, and that recognizing manipulation requires education and awareness rather than intelligence alone. But we also learned that recovery from exploitation is possible, that families can heal from betrayal and deception, and that traumatic experiences can be transformed into wisdom and advocacy that protects other people. Walter Henderson is serving 12 years in prison for sexually exploiting at least 4 young women over a 15-year period. He'll be 82 years old when he's released, if he lives that long. Jasmine is now a licensed therapist specializing in exploitation recovery and family trauma. She works with victims of grooming and sexual abuse, helping them understand their experiences and rebuild their ability to trust appropriate people. I'm still processing the realization that my best friend of 30 years was a predator who spent decades positioning himself to exploit my daughter. But I'm also grateful that we discovered the truth before Walter could cause even more damage to Jasmine's life and future. The OnlyFans account with 1 subscriber revealed a level of betrayal and manipulation that destroyed my trust in my own judgment about people. But it also revealed the strength and resilience of my daughter, who was able to recognize the truth about her exploitation and transform her victimization into a mission to protect other young women. Sometimes the most devastating discoveries lead to the most important transformations. Sometimes learning that you've been betrayed by someone you trusted is the first step toward building genuine protection for your family. My name is Calvin Thompson. I'm 57 years old, and 5 years ago I discovered that my daughter's OnlyFans account had only 1 subscriber. My best friend of 30 years who'd been grooming and exploiting her since she was 18 years old. Walter Henderson spent decades building trust with our family so he could sexually exploit my daughter while maintaining his facade as the caring uncle figure who wanted to help her succeed. He convinced Jasmine that sexual exploitation was career development, that financial coercion was generous support, and that predatory behavior was loving guidance. He convinced me that his unusual interest in my daughter was appropriate family friendship, that his financial support was generous mentorship, and that his isolation techniques were legitimate career assistance. Walter's exploitation cost Jasmine 3 years of her life, $180,000 in exploitative payments, and her ability to trust people without suspicion. But it also gave her a mission to protect other young women from predators who disguise abuse as opportunity, and it gave our family a deeper understanding of how manipulation and grooming operate within trusted relationships. Walter thought he could exploit my daughter indefinitely because he'd successfully hidden his true nature for 30 years and because he'd conditioned Jasmine to see exploitation as support. But predators always make mistakes, and Walter's mistake was underestimating both my love for my daughter and her strength once she understood what had really happened to her. Now Walter is in prison, Jasmine is protecting other families from similar predators, and I'm sharing our story so other parents can recognize the warning signs we missed for too long. Trust but verify. Love but protect. And never assume that someone's public persona reflects their private intentions, especially when it comes to the safety of your children. Look at your screen right now. You'll see 2 more stories waiting for you. Both from men like me who discovered the truth too late, but not too late to fight back. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And hit that notification bell if you want to join our brotherhood of men who refuse to be played for fools. Until next time, remember, the truth always comes out, and when it does, be ready.